Well, hello again to my viewers. Well, I hesitate about where I should place this book exactly. So here it's Humility. It's by Puritan, Thomas Brooks. You can see a little subtitle, The Least of All the Saints. But what you'll notice is that it is not a Puritan paperback. This is just one of Thomas Brooks's works, so specifically on humility. And it's a fairly short book. It's about 105 pages, but again, with Thomas Brooks, he just is full of good wisdom, good biblical truth, and just wonderful illustrations. Even Charles Spurgeon has little quotes here. As a writer, Thomas Brooks scatters stars with both his hands, with an eagle eye of faith, as well as the eagle eye of imagination. He has dust of gold. In his storehouse are all manner of precious stones. Genius is always marvelous, but when sanctified, it is matchless. And I did a quick read through because I was looking for this quote I just could not find. And I was reading it and I was just, again, like, wow. The points that Brooks makes, the illustration, his choice of illustrations, oh, it's just gold. It really is just gold. So if you do struggle with pride, if you're looking to become more humble, this is a good pickup. It's a very small book, 105 pages, and an easy read. So, what is his main point? Well, the little subtitle there, The Least of All the Saints. So, his emphasis here is really on, what is humility? What makes a Christian really say, I am the least of all the saints? Just as Paul did. Paul, right, he has a past where it's just evidence why he is the least of all the saints. He was persecuting the Church of Christ. He killed Christians. And now he becomes a Christian. So it's almost like a little bit obvious, like, oh, Paul, of course, should be humble. But what about each one of us Christians who have a more normal kind of a background? How do we cultivate humility? And even in chapter 1, Thomas Brooks, he says, the most holy are always the most humble. And here I should go into the chapters. So there, the most holy are always the most humble. Then the reasons why the best are the most humble, some motives for humility, some helps and directions in how to get there, to become a humble Christian. Then the dangers of pride, he gives a couple warnings, and then there the last chapter is just 2 pages, but just point form notes of, be humble, be clothed with humility. And really, if I could really summarize this whole book, Brooks is really encouraging each and every Christian to meditate on the mercy that he has received from God, first and foremost. If you really dwell on the mercy you've received, you've been saved from wrath, you've been saved from sin, and you've been shown that grace. You're just so undeserving of this mercy. That should bring you to your knees and really just make you ponder, like, how in the world does God have so much mercy for me? So, the humble Christian then, meditates often on his own sinfulness, and then he looks to see, how can I be more humble? How can I be more godly? How can I live upon Christ? So here, if I can use one example, you can see right away, humble soul is teachable, but I believe this section here is a humble soul bears wrongs. So here he uses 2 examples. So Dionysus, having treated Plato poorly at the court, when he was gone, fearing lest he should write against him, he sent after him to bid him not to write against him. Replied Plato, tell Dionysus that I have not so much time as to think of him. So humble, wronged souls have no time to think of the wrongs and injuries that others do them. So there, Plato, he's humble, doesn't care that he's been wronged. He has no time to think about that. Another example, John Fox, he wrote the Box of Martyrs, and really, if a man would have Mr. Fox do him a kindness, let him do him an injury. A humble soul is often in looking over the wrongs and injuries that he has done to God, and a sweet and tender treatment of God towards them, notwithstanding those wrongs and injuries. And this wins him and works him to be more willing and ready to bear wrongs, and forgive wrongs, than to revenge any offered wrongs. So again, though people sin against us, sin against you, a humble soul really just reflects on, oh, I've sinned against God so much more. So what? So what if someone sins against me? I've sinned greatly against God. It's a small thing for someone to sin against me. So there it's having that right perspective of how terrible your sin is first and foremost to God, and then how much smaller, sin between equals are. Sin between someone else, another sinner, that's a small thing. And I think one of his best points was that pride is a sin that's, it's the sin that looks at God directly and, almost like spits at God in the face directly. It's different from other sins because the other sins, they're almost like an indirect kind of offense towards God. But pride is the one that's just bold enough to look God in the face and just sin directly against God. The other one is almost like, you hope that God doesn't see, but of course God sees. And then you commit the sin and God is sort of watching. But pride is just, it's blatant. Blatant, just stares God in the face and just sins boldly against him. And here, Brooks says, pride is Satan's disease. Pride is so base a disease that God had rather see his dearest children, so Christians, to be buffeted by Satan, so harassed by Satan, than that in pride that they should be like Satan. So, God, he would prefer that Christians would go under temptation, that they would be harassed by Satan. That's better for them than for them to become prideful and to become like Satan himself. So that is a bit of a sobering truth, right? I think not many of us would volunteer to be harassed by Satan. Not many of us would want to be in the position of Job. But if you were put in that position, well, that's still better than being someone who is proud. And Brooks, he does make that comment too about if you are someone who is going through a period of affliction, a humble soul will sanctify God's name. A humble soul will justify God's name. So again, you probably heard me if you've listened to some of these other videos. It's like a vessel or some sort of a glass or container. If it's empty, right, once the rod of affliction and suffering comes, then that person has to make noise. It's like Cain, he's like, oh, my punishment is more than I can bear. Or it's like those who just have to complain about their situation. Oh, misery has befallen me. Oh, I'm so pitiful. They have to cry out. But a humble soul, they will justify God's name. Though God's rod of affliction hits them, they're full of humility, they're full of God's grace, they will not make a sound. And here, perhaps I should point to one of the points at the end. I think this one is a hard point to really take in. So here, humility will seem much good abroad when it can see but little at home. Humility will make a man of high thoughts of others and low thoughts of a man's self. Humility will make a man excellent at covering others' infirmities and at recording their gracious services and at delighting in their graces. So there, really, it's humility makes you think better of others. You recognize this low view of yourself. I am a sinner. But, when I look at others, I'm going to think, well of them as best as I can. Of course, if they obviously just have a blatant sin, then that's unavoidable. And having, high thoughts of others, a low view of self, it's similar to what Thomas says. He says about, making gracious deductions about others. That's something that Christians should try to do, as much as they can. I think often of, I was in a grade 9 class, and there's a gym teacher who said, you shouldn't assume about others. And he wrote assume, A-S-S-U-M-E, because when you do assume, it makes an ass out of you and me. So, bit of a funny joke. That one's always sort of kept with me. But I think, humility, it does try to have those high thoughts of others while keeping a low view of self. So humility, Brooks, he does talk a lot about the usefulness of humility. It makes a man serviceable. This man recognizes that he has such a high calling to serve Christ, but at the same time, he's not above any other low and meanly task. The lowest task ever, maybe just setting up chairs, cleaning stuff up. A humble Christian is willing to do that. And it really is just, I think, a sobering lesson, right? Because it's natural in each person to be proud. But to have a humble soul, to really live upon Christ, to cry out in humility to God, to Christ, it's humbling. But it's good because that makes you more like Christ. And there's a quote, I'm not going to pull it up here this time. And here it says, "Poor men are full of desires. They are often crying out, 'Oh, that we had bread to strengthen us, drink to refresh us, clothes to cover us, friends to visit us, and houses to shelter us.' So souls that are spiritually poor are often sighing out, 'Oh, that we had more of Christ to strengthen us, more of Christ to refresh us, more of Christ to be a covering and shelter to us.' I had rather," says the humble soul, "be a poor man and a rich Christian than a rich man and a poor Christian." "Lord," says the humble soul, "I had rather do anything. I had rather bear anything. I had rather be anything than to be a dwarf in grace." And you just wonder, like, how in the world does Thomas Brooks just come up with just such good quotes, right? So poor men, carnal men, really, non souls that aren't humble, they're always crying about, "Oh, I wish I had something good to eat. I wish I had drink. Wish I had clothes. Wish I had friends. Wish I had a house, right, to live in, to shelter me." But the humble soul is one that is spiritually poor and just says, "Oh, I wish I had more of Christ. More of Christ for all my needs. Christ to strengthen me. Christ to refresh us. More of Christ as a covering and shelter." Because you recognize your sinfulness. "Oh, I need to be covered. Something has to cover me." So, I don't think I need to say too much more about it. This is a book that it's worth reading. It talks much about, it really covers quite a bit. So humility, it helps the man, mortify sin. You recognize the awfulness of sin. So there, in humility, as a recipient of God's mercy, you want to sin less and less. And there's just so many ways that someone can grow in humility. So, having read it, I've not become humble overnight. Even when I did read it, I saw how proud I was just even the week after. Having high thoughts of others, low view of myself. I'm not that. So, humility, something we must labor for, something that I must labor for, something that I have to grow in time and time again. I think you always think, "Oh, I've become humble," right? "Oh, I'm teachable. Someone can correct me." But there's things that you just are not aware of, even in yourself, and you just, when you see it, you're like, "Oh, I've been so proud again. Oh, I thought I was humble, but I'm never quite humble enough." I think too, his warnings against pride. It's easy to see pride in others, but seeing pride in yourself, that's hard for us to see. I think we're most blind to our own pride. But again, pride is the one that provokes God, and it's the one that God does conquer. So here, my encouragement is, yes, dwell deeply on God's mercy for you. Dwell deeply on your terrible condition. "Oh, my sin, I've committed many sins." my hope is there for me. And that should bring me to my knees, crying out to God, please, please save me. Please have mercy on my soul. Don't deal with me according to my iniquities, to my sins, but deal with me according to Christ. And then give me more of Christ, please. Please give me more of Christ. Let me be clothed with the humility of Christ. Just as it says in Philippians, in humility, consider others as more significant than yourselves. That's the goal. But just so hard as fallen sinners. So, a little bit of a shorter review, but again with Brooks, always just worth reading. And easy read, short book, just maybe $10, $12. It's worth the cost, right? You read it again, and just labor to be humble. Pride, it would make a man, any man, become more like the devil. But humility, it makes us more like Christ, and that's such a good thing. It's always so good to be more like Christ, live upon Christ, depend upon Christ, desire Christ, and really just magnify Christ in all that you do. See Christ as the greatest thing that you have. That's the greatest joy for every Christian. And to really feel that weight upon your soul, it requires humility. Because, I can do nothing apart from Christ, and I have no good apart from Christ. But in Christ, I have all that I need. He will shelter me. He will refresh me. He will strengthen me. So, thank you again for watching this video. I am seeing if I can keep some of the videos slightly shorter. I'm not sure if you viewers would prefer longer videos where I am nice background noise, or just shorter videos that are more just straight into the point. So with shorter books, I'll try to be a bit shorter, but with longer ones, I'm not sure. So if you do have opinions, by all means, just leave a comment or just let me know. DM me directly, and I will take it. I'm a humble soul. I am teachable, but I can always grow in humility, and so can you. So hope to see you in the next video. Grace to you and peace.